The Sky News financial report is sponsored by IG Smart Portfolios.
Now, the flooding in South Asia has arguably caused much greater devastation than Storm Harvey in the United States, with hundreds dead and millions of people displaced. But media coverage, both in broadcast and print in the UK, has focused much more on events in Texas and Louisiana. So why the disparity? Well, joining me to discuss this is Phil Hall. He's the chairman of PHA Media and former editor of the News of the World. And Lester Holloway, he's communications director at the Runnymede Trust and a consultant at Operation Black Vote. Thank you both for joining me. First of all, Lester, I want to start with you. Do you think that potentially too much focus, too much coverage has been made of what's going on in America with Hurricane Harvey and the storm that followed?
No, absolutely not. I'm definitely not saying there's too much coverage. What I'm saying is that there's too little coverage of the tragedies that have befallen the monsoon areas of Nepal, Bangladesh and India, and of course at Sierra Leone. And the death toll in the United States is likely to be somewhere between 40 and 50, which obviously is a tragedy in itself. But there's been 1,000 lives lost in Sierra Leone in the mudslide, and 1,300 lives so far in South Asia. So what we're really calling for is parity. Because when we actually have coverage which is fair across the world, then we feel more empathy with them, and therefore we feel a greater need for action, such as donations, such as appeals. Yeah,
Phil, do you think Lester has a point?
I do think Lester has a point. I think the key word there was fair, and it is not fair and balanced. But the reason this happens is because most media outlets are commercial beasts. They're very in tune with their viewers or their readers. They know exactly what sells papers or makes people watch TV programs. We used to say in my day in newspapers, it was someone like us. People associate with Texas because they see the little suburban town is like a suburban town in England, whereas they look at pictures from Nepal or Bangladesh and it's slightly more frenetic. And while there's empathy and sympathy, there isn't the same association.
I mean, there is the argument, is really working in the media as a provider of somebody working in the news, is it about giving the audience what they want? Or is it also about educating the audience, Phil? Isn't that what media outlets and organisations should be focusing on?
I think so, but there has to be some balance. And certainly when no one was coming on to have this debate, I looked at the newspapers to see what coverage there has been, and there has been coverage, but you're right, it's not been wall to wall. I think the other problem is that newspapers and TV outlets need balance. They're looking for other things as well. Today's Sky is full of politics or full of football news. There is coverage, and if you're covering one big flood, it's very hard to cover four. It starts to become, it just turns readers and viewers off. However harsh that is, that's what happens.
I mean, Lester, when the mudslides at Sierra Leone started to unfold, that broke, many media organisations, I'm talking about TV anyway, many of them actually sent correspondents, they sent reporters out there to cover that. And in fact, it actually overrode the coverage of what was going on in Southeast Asia with the flooding there. Is that not right? Isn't that the sort of thing you want to see? And didn't media outlets do what you want there?
Well, I think it's about the extent of coverage. I think in the United States, what we're seeing in Texas and Louisiana is many more reporters, many more TV crews, and as a result, they're able to cover stories in more depth. So they actually cover not just the story as a whole, the tragedy as a whole, but they're interviewing individual people who are suffering. Their stories of heroism, stories of how it actually feels. Whereas in the developing world, in the global south, we just have an interview often with aid agencies and pictures of locals digging through rubble with their bare hands. But I think in the UK we have to remember that there are 3 million people of South Indian heritage, and a lot of them are asking themselves, where is the coverage when tens of millions of people are affected in that region, when over 1,300 people have died? Where is the coverage? They're turning off channels like BBC and I have to say Sky, and tuning into the cables to get news of their loved ones. So when it comes to what stories matter more, there's only about 200,000 Americans in the UK. So surely the editors of newspapers and broadcasts should actually be saying that what matters perhaps more, or at least equally, is the story as it's unfolding with the monsoon.
Very interesting points, Phil. I mean, what would you say to that? What would you do if you were still editor at News of the World?
Well, I would still be covering the stories that my readers are interested in, and I think that includes Texas particularly, but of course there would be some coverage of the flooding in Asia, but it's never going to be the same, because there isn't the same association. And I think Lester made a very good point there. 3 million people of Indian extraction interested in their family over there. The great thing that happens in this country at the moment, there is great diversity in the media. It's not just Sky and BBC. There are worldwide channels, there are Asian channels, there are specific channels focusing on all aspects of life around the world, and there is that diversity.
Is that a fair point, Lester? Essentially, there are organisations and catered more so for that demographic, more so in making coverage for those areas, other areas around the world. Is the onus? Is that enough, essentially?
No, I think it actually reflects badly on the mainstream media if British-born people actually have to tune in to channels in other parts of the world in order to find out what is happening. And I think that what we are seeing is there is a problem of diversity within the media, particularly at decision-making level, particularly at editor level and news desk level. And often I think the wrong choices are made because when it comes to newsworthiness, the decisions have a certain audience in mind, and that audience often is not diverse Britain, it's not multicultural Britain. So I think the mindset needs to change amongst editorial decision makers to change their priorities, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that definitely does require some kind of wider discussion on that. But Phil Hall and Lester Holloway, good talking to you both. Thank you.
Thank you.